The Great Shield nerf of 2019 has made tanking much more difficult, but also a lot more fun if you know what to do. But I see so many players making very easily fixable mistakes that in today's video, I wanted to break down the new things that you want to be focusing on with all of the barrier tanks. Principles discussed today are going to go for characters like Reinhardt, Orisa, Sigma, Winston. Just managing barriers is an entirely different world now than it's ever been before. And we're going to go over all of the rules in order to actually get any sustain on a tank and not just get melted or feel like you have to feed in order to do anything. The first example I want to bring up is actually a clip I saw on my friend Peak's channel. In this video, he talks about the best tank combos. You want to check that out, linked in the description to see his take on that. But what I found interesting is the types of positioning and ways Peak rotates with his Orisa barrier here. Normally, at every rank, you see the team overly put the barriers in the choke, but you'll see him do something quite interesting here, which is, as the brawl starts to develop, he's tucking away the barrier out of the enemy's line of sight. He's actually hiding it, putting it in a more defensive position, and there's multiple reasons for this. Both teams are playing a brawly comp, so staying defensive on a corner is better. We'll talk more about that later, but the other more transferable lesson about barrier health in Overwatch now is that you no longer can treat it like a free sustain button. Because they're breakable, you actually have to make good decisions on where to place it and when to allow it to take damage. And actually, guarding your barrier and protecting it is a massive valuable resource that if you manage correctly, you're going to have a huge sustain buff just by placing your shield in the right position while the enemy allows your team to farm theirs. So let me teach you how to do this and what not to do to maximize this gameplay. Okay, the classic Hanamura choke, everybody's favorite claustrophobic bit of map geometry to get past. Let's describe how this works. So, if you put your barrier here, there are benefits to doing this. You can draw some aggro, maybe get your Zarya bubble charged, and allow for your teammates to peek out and maybe get some poke, damage in, etc. The problem is, when playing this way, is that if the enemy do the right response when you're over facing your barrier forward and use cover, then all of a sudden things look differently, okay? So if your team is poking out, trying to get something done with the barrier you're showing, and the Reinhardt on the enemy team preserves his off to the corner, and if we reveal our barrier to these cover points, the enemy can win the shield war because we're giving it to them. You see, the thing about cover in Overwatch is that it's now way better than a barrier. It used to not be, but if we have the enemy swiveling around cover like this, where they can poke in and out, they don't need a barrier to work yours down, and it's very hard to instantly kill them anytime they poke out like this. So because of that, while our Reinhardt on attack is saving his barrier, as soon as we start to crack the defenses, well, then we easily can go in with our own tanking resources and just bully the enemy back and probably just win the brawl. That's how barrier fights work now in Overwatch. If you begin to lose them, you instantly lose the team fight, okay? So what you need to do is realize that on the defense, this is what makes defending much harder nowadays, is your job as the main tank is to be much more careful about your decision making when you're ever going to reveal your barrier to be able to be poked down by the enemy. Why would you want to do this? Well, of course, as soon as the enemy have a line of sight that you have to protect, say there's a Widowmaker up here and a teammate going to get sniped, and you see that Widowmaker, you're probably going to want to pop up your shield to block that, right? But the point is, the goal for your barrier health is to get these players into cover. That's what barriers are for. They're allowing you to peek in a spot that's bad positioning normally, and then allow you to get safely into cover before you openly die. It's not to just simply hold the line forever on the front line. You cannot do that anymore on this new patch. So instead, the way that optimal tank play would look is perhaps we move in to just brawl a little bit and get Zarya charge, but after that, we all need to run away and play defensively when it's time to preserve the shield. Now, if we take a look back at the clip from GosuPeak, we can see this play out. Now, both teams are running very brawly characters. We have a Brigitte on our side, which means we badly need to play corners in order to get value, but also the enemy have brawlers as well. So we want to be able to interrupt them closing the distance on us while hopefully holding on to our resources as much as possible possible, and as well abusing really OP Batiste's lamp lines of sight where you put it safely around a corner. Now, I know the problem with transferring these types of tactics into your ranked experience, I have the same problem too, as I've been coming up to speed playing ranked again. I'm incredibly rusty, getting better day by day, thankfully, but you'll notice that teammates aren't going to hide away when you don't have your barrier up. They're going to want to take peeks nonstop, but that doesn't really give you an excuse to use your barrier poorly. And really what I would advise you to do is try to use comms to tell your team when they can and can't peek, and instead manage your barrier as well as you can. This is something that I'm even learning over time by myself. You notice that this gameplay here is by no means perfect, and we can kind of see the ends of both spectrums with where the barrier gets effective to when it gets easily shredded. Even by putting it quite far back like this, the enemy Roadhog can see it and just jiggle peek around and crack it before they have to commit. Poking the barrier down safely is one of the easiest ways for the attacking side to advance. So because of that, you probably have to put the barrier in a much safer place, either where Peek had it or more safely around one of the two corners. The only problem is the enemy's got a Widowmaker. And in order for my team to be able to pressure her, I do have to shield them. So there's a bit of a trade-off with how you have to think about that. You're in a constant dance now with managing how much pressure you can put on the enemy versus how much you can afford to withstand yourself. The overall team math of this gets figured out very quickly now, which is really going to stress your decision making as tank. And another major tip about barriers is I'd say the best way to think about them is that they work much better in small numbers. Barriers are extremely weak now in a full 6v6 team engagement. And instead, you want to be looking for opportunities to place a clutch barrier in the way that Winston always used to. If you're familiar with playing him back in the dive era and how to place down a bubble to intercept the team fight, that's how like all barriers kind of work now, because they're so much flimsier and require much more high value decision making rather than just constantly spamming it out and having it never die. This clip here kind of shows what I mean in that regard, where the enemy is pressuring through and taking space, but they're still leaving some members at the choke. And although you might want to mirror the movement and advancement of the enemy, keeping a barrier here at the choke blocks off 2 members of the enemy team, while I still can turn around and contribute to the fight on the other side with my supercharger. And in this way, you really want to find opportunities to create off angles or to separate teams with barriers rather than expecting them to always last in front of your team in the death ball scenario that we sort of debunked in my recent guide talking about positioning and pathing. Now, keep in mind, you can do this with any tank. I've been playing a lot of Orisa because I think she just has so much potential, but all of the barrier tanks operate this way, where really you want to be able to establish power positions on the map rather than just endlessly toss your resources at the payload or brawl endlessly. That only works if you have the very small subset of heroes that do that. Most other heroes are going to take more advantage from controlling high ground, and this is a situation where I do that up top. Because so many characters need high ground to be effective, you as the tank need to go up there so your team can guarantee to control it while still playing around corners. By doing this and playing more split means that the enemy have multiple targets to shoot at, and they can't just all easily focus your barrier, and the few teammates that do use your barrier get much more effect out of it. Now, of course, if you're playing Reaper Mei, a lot of this changes, and you have a much more goatsy approach to the game. Everyone bottles up. But most of the Overwatch characters don't perform that way, and I think this is more useful for the majority of players who aren't in top 500 to just worry about the basic map control elements of the game, because it applies for setting up every ranged DPS and all the flankers too, I would say. It's really only the brawlers that benefit from all getting clumped up together, and there's not actually that many of them, despite them being very strong. Well, guys, that's all I have for you for today. There'll be more videos on the way as we continue to learn, experiment, and figure out this patch. So if you want to make sure that you get notified when they come out, be sure to hit the subscribe button and also the bell icon so that you actually get notified when we release a video. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And as well, follow us on Twitter for further discussion and observations about what's going on in the game of Overwatch, as well as dank memes, of course. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.